Welcome to the International Conference on Transformative Education. I'm glad you're here. For those who are here live, if you want to say hi in the chat, I don't get to see you in this format, so it's nice to know there's people out there. If you're watching the recording, thanks for checking that out too. Ellen, it's great to see you. Thanks for stopping by. So we're going to be talking today about shaping the future and empowering learners to live your school mission. So a lot of our school missions talk about preparing students for the future and helping students become global citizens and being change makers and shaping the future. What are we actually doing in schools to really know that we're successful in living our mission? So we're going to look at a couple ways today that we might be able to do that. We might be able to design learning to shape our aspirational future and generate evidence that we are living our school mission every day in our classrooms. So that's really our focus today. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? All right. So my name is Scott, and I am from an organization called Inspire Citizens. We work with schools around the world to design programs around global citizenship. My contact information is back there. I'm not sure how fast I can type in the chat, but you can email me at scott@inspirecitizens.org if something sparks your interest on this call. I am originally from Canada, which, if it's not obvious yet, will be if you listen to me for about 45 more seconds from the East Coast. But I have spent time overseas as an educator for all of my adult life, as a teacher and administrator in schools in the Middle East, in China, and Southeast Asia. Really passionate about global citizenship and how we might design programs like service learning programs or student leadership programs, or ways we can kind of build skills scaffolded through our scope and sequence to empower students to be change makers and take an active role in shaping their future. I have a podcast where I talk to students about this work. It's called Empathy to Impact, and you can find that wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And well, thanks for coming. I'm really glad you're here. So we're going to skip over next slide. If you want to find out more about Inspire Citizens, you can check out inspirecitizens.org. Next slide. It really is all kind of started from this place of Sustainable Development Target 4.7 and thinking about education for sustainable development and global citizenship. This is really a call to action to our founders, Aaron Moniz and Steve Stostak. And they started Inspire Citizens based around this goal. And if we look at some of the language here, thinking about sustainable development, sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace, nonviolence, and global citizenship, cultural diversity, and culture's contribution to sustainable development. Like, this is what we aspire towards as educators. And this is what Inspire Citizens strives to do, is really design the how of this. How do we bring this to life in schools? And we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. So if we go to the next slide, by optimizing our existing systems, thinking about empathy and impact, service learning, sustainability, and global citizenship, together, us right here in this space, we are exactly what is needed to move Target 4.7 forward. Next, please. So at Inspire Citizens, we do a lot of different things. Working with schools, working with teachers, working with students. We do coaching. We design programs. We have a not-for-profit foundation that allows us to take our work to many places around the world that maybe don't have the same kind of resources that our international schools do. And we love to tell stories. You can find our stories on our website, in our vignettes, and on our podcast, talking about some of the work we've done and looking at what this work looks like in practice. I got some links in the slide on the next slide. So if you want to find out more about any of these things, you can check out any of these links in the slide deck that's going to be shared out with you. All right, so we go to the next one. I'm going to be talking a little bit today, but I want to give you guys a chance to just make this a little bit more interactive. And so in the chat, I'd love for you to imagine first a student at your school reflecting on their learning experience 5 years from now. What is the one invaluable learning or mindset that you hope they carry with them into the future? So in the chat, let me know what you're thinking. What is that one invaluable learning or mindset that you hope your students carry with them beyond learning with you in the classroom or at your school in your role? While you're thinking and typing, I'm going to guess that we're not going to see things like the fundamental theorem of calculus, or how to write a good 5-paragraph essay, or how to spell 5-syllable words coming up in these things. We're thinking about some of these big issues that connect back to Sustainable Development Target 4.7. And if we go to our next slide, so I want to think about, what does our aspirational future actually look like and sound like and feel like? And it's something we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. If we go to the next slide, we don't often spend time really engaging with futures thinking in schools. And I empathize. We're busy. We've got a lot of curriculum content. And there's a lot to think about when we're designing learning for students. Do we spend time really thinking about where we strive to be in 2035? Imagining, what if we did everything we could right now to work towards a sustainable future? What does that look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? I love in the chat, I'm seeing talking about taking multiple perspectives. Thanks, Ellen, for sharing that. And capable, that mindset of being capable of affecting great change on their inner and outer. If you were in Lottie Dowling's session just previously, she was talking about that connection between inner and outer. So Alice, thanks so much for bringing that up. When we're thinking about the future, we are really, really good at thinking about dystopian futures and post-apocalyptic futures. We've got lots of cool science fiction and visionary fiction or speculative fiction that we engage in. A lot of times in middle school, we have a whole unit dedicated to dystopia. But we don't have a lot of readings or visuals or media that talk about our sustainable future. If we go to the next slide, a lot of times when we're thinking about the future, next please, it looks like somewhere we probably don't really want to live. This is an image from the movie depiction of Ready Player One, which is kind of a dystopic future where students live in kind of a multiverse, had to go to school and exist there most of their life. And we don't see any plants in this image. We don't see a lot of very nice places to live. Oh, I'm sorry, there is a plant on the right side, lonely up there. But what does our sustainable future, even look like? If we go to the next slide. And this is something that I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about today. What does our sustainable future look like, sound like, and feel like? Because we don't know. If we don't know what our target is, it's really difficult to design learning experiences to work towards that target if we don't really know what it is. So another alternative, go to the next slide. There is an emerging genre called solar punk. That if you haven't found it yet, you really should. It's a collection of media. It might be art, maybe visual arts, might be stories, novels that look at what life might be like in a sustainable, just, equitable, and joyful future. I wonder if we could trade in maybe some of our dystopian book studies for something in a solar punk genre. I also want to give a shout out to a couple of really cool books that have really shaped my thinking around this topic. If we go to the next slide, this is From What Is to What If, a book by Rob Hopkins. Check out his TED Talk if you're not familiar. He's got a cool podcast too called From What If to What Next, and really talking about unleashing the power of education, or sorry, of imagination to create the future we want. Another cool short read on the next slide is from the Big Question Institute by Will Richardson. If you're not familiar with Will and Homa's work, you should definitely follow them. They are really doing some amazing things in this space. And he's talking about school punk. So taking a spin from solar punk and thinking about school punk and how we might design school differently to help us to kind of work towards our aspirational future. This book is free. You can go to their website and download it, and it's pretty awesome. Next slide. If you were just in the last session, we missed one, I think, right here. My good friend Lottie Dowling, who might be called Charlotte at this conference. If you didn't see her presentation, please go watch the recording. She curates a list of picture books for young global citizens called Young Global Bookworms on Instagram. Also, if you have your phone handy, all the resources I'm going to be sharing with you are linked in the slides. But if you want to just grab your phone, everything's got a QR code as we go through. So if you got your phone handy, you can scan some of these. And this is Lottie's curation of picture books for young global citizens. It's on Instagram. Next slide, please. So how might we use futures thinking strategies to envision our world in 2050? I use this resource quite often as a launch into things like PYP exhibition or community projects, thinking about what future are we aspiring towards or working to avoid, and how might we design actions today to either work towards or work to avoid a future that we're going to visit through this scenario. So go to the next slide, please. Often I'm going to start out with students thinking about what futures thinking is not. We're not going to be talking about time machines. We're not talking about crystal balls. Futures thinking is actually a strategy that's used by businesses. It's used in strategic planning. It's used all over the place to help us kind of design and use some long-term thinking to make projections and design programs. So it's actually funny. I tell them it's not time machines, and then we actually do use a fictional time machine. But really, we're looking at these drivers of change. We're looking at things like climate change, social polarization, biodiversity loss, the future of technology and AI, mental health, and equality, maybe specifically gender equality. All these drivers of change are going to shape our future. And how might we look at these in a strategic way, be futures thinkers, and see if we might have an impact on kind of nudging the world in our local community, maybe even within our own school community, towards that future we want. So we go to the next slide. If you want to look at the whole resource, QR code is here. But what Arup does is it takes a 2x2 matrix. This is a 2x2 scenario. So we line up any two drivers of change. And I've done this with my middle school students, where we've picked two different drivers of change, the future of technology and globalization, maybe. We put them on like an XY axis. And what we end up with is 4 plausible possible futures. And this document is a really robust example of this. And it's a great way, if you don't have a lot of time, which we're always short on, to kind of explore these different futures. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see some artist renditions. Next slide, please. We're going to kind of go through and read some stories and collaborate together. You can see some students working on this. Here they are again, kind of looking at some of these different futures. We're going to see some short written descriptions. If we look at the next slide, we're going to see a case study where we look at someone living in that particular future and what their life is like. There's a short story depicting someone's life in 2050. On the next slide, we're going to see a timeline, sort of how we got from now, from 2020s to 2050 and some of the big milestones along the way that got us from where we are today to this particular 2050. So we go to the next slide. We're going to zoom in on some of these pictures, and we're going to see some different things. We're going to kind of maybe use some thinking routines like see, think, wonder as we're looking through these from Project Zero. And looking at some of the different clues here that we see a lot of green in this city. We see a lot of plants, but we don't see a lot of, the people are in kind of ratty clothes. And you might ask questions why. We're going to see some really cool sustainable development data. This is from the blue future. So you see a lot of those sustainable development goals. Those sliders are moved way to the right. Things are going pretty well. But you see also, it's not a utopia. There are still some challenges in this future. So we go to the next slide. So again, we're going to work collaboratively as a team. We're going to visit one of these futures. Imagine we're going to go in a time machine, even though I said we wouldn't use time machines. It's always kind of fun to contradict ourselves. But we're going to go, and what I usually assign students is giving them a task to bring something back. If you think about the movie Back to the Future, we're going to go to that future. Imagine we're taking a trip there, and we're going to bring something back. So the next slide is an example of a task that I might assign students for this. I might say, all right, we're going to look around, we're going to visit and see what daily life looks like. We're going to look at the big picture from like a high altitude view, and then we're going to come zoom right in on individual people. And I asked them to bring me back 2 artifacts. And it can really be anything. It might be a news headline. It might be a political cartoon. It might be a t-shirt. It might be a restaurant menu. It might be something they saw on the street. And just being fun and thoughtful and imaginative as they're going through this. And then they're going to come back and they're going to share out with the group why that particular item was a good representation of their 2050. So we go to the next slide. We also might use a compass points reflection. This is also from Harvard's Project Zero, one of my favorite resources. And this compass points reflection, thinking about what they're excited about, what's worrisome, what they need to know, and what their stance is. And for this activity, I actually modify it a little bit. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to modify this slightly. So for needs to know, like excited and worried, we're going to keep those pretty consistent with what they have in the actual document. But needs to know, I want 2 questions that they would ask to people living in that 2050. And for stance, this is where we're kind of getting into what are we going to do? What are our action steps? What are 2 to 3 actions we might take right now to work towards, or maybe work to avoid, the future they visited? So if we go ahead. So it's really kind of zooming in on that stance, because this is really what we're going to take with us next. And then this is something I borrowed from a good friend, Jamie Cloud, from the Cloud Institute for Sustainability Education. I like how she frames this. We are all responsible. It's not our fault as students that the world is where it is. But if we don't all take responsibility towards working towards our sustainable future, who will? And I think that, Lottie talked about that in her session about getting into that inner development. But that idea that everything we do and everything we don't do makes a difference. A lot of students are feeling really overwhelmed right now, and they don't think their actions matter. But there's a lot of great resources out there. Lottie mentioned Dr. Jane Goodall's Book of Hope. Jane was 86, I think, when that book was published. If she still has hope, I think there's still hope to be had. Ellen Kelsey also wrote a book called Hope Matters, just kind of framing things. And she's got some great resources on her webpage on how to present some of these challenges through the lens of evidence-based hope. Let's go to the next slide. So when we're thinking about action, this is our framework from Inspire Citizens. We call it empathy to impact. So we designed learning for holistic global citizenship, thinking about being engaged, learning and living mindfully, embracing change, and demonstrating sustainable and inner development. And we do that through these case stages of care, aware, able, and impact. So it's really about the head, the heart, and the hands. So what is the issue that we really care about? How am I becoming more deeply aware of that issue? How am I using all these amazing skills and knowledge and dispositions that I'm developing in my learning in class to have a positive, sustainable, and meaningful impact in my community? So we want to be able to not just learn this knowledge and skills, but be able to apply this in a meaningful way to have a positive impact. And we're not going to solve world hunger in our grade 4 class, but maybe we can move the needle for someone. It's like the story, I'm going to quote this wrong, but there's a story about crabs or starfish being washed up on the beach. And there's a boy there throwing the starfish back. And someone calls out to him, "Well, you're never going to be able to save all of them. Why does it matter?" And he says, "It matters to that one." So if we think about that, if we can design an action that has a positive impact in our community, we're not only going to have an impact on the people in our community, we're going to have an impact by inspiring others to join us, create that sense of unity and belonging. And if we work together, that grows and that impact grows. And that's where the magic is in this. So today, I don't have a lot of time. I would love to spend half a day with all of you thinking about this. But if we go to the next slide, we are going to zoom in on impact. How might I take meaningful action? How are we going to take a meaningful, sustainable action to address the issue we care about? And to do that, if we go to our next slide, we're going to think of this really short line. We're going to think about who might we learn from and act with. Who in our community might already be working on this problem? We're probably not the first people to come up with this one. So who's already working on this? What solutions are being tried? And how might we act with those people who are working on this? So learning from and acting with. How are we connecting with our community? So if we go to our next slide, there's a lot of different ways we can take action. We can think about these different types of actions and service that we might be able to take. And a lot of times in school, we get stuck down at the bottom. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm wondering, I'm going to challenge you to think about how we might thinking about maybe some of the things we're doing in school, some of our fundraisers maybe that are very common in schools. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm saying, how might we incorporate some direct service where we're making a direct connection with people, the environment, or animals, and students are kind of making that meaningful connection to what that fundraising is connected to. Maybe through that work, we're also doing some advocacy where we're raising awareness in order to promote that action, and thinking about how we might lift up our community partner or the work that we're doing through advocacy, through a direct service, through our research, to really make our action a little more meaningful, both to ourselves and to the people we're building relationships with. So we go to the next slide. This is some pictures from around our network at Inspire Citizens, and thinking about all the different ways we might be able to take action. So we start in the top corner, we're thinking about students who are participating in a composting program at their school. Maybe we're advocating for more green space on campus. You see a young lady taking some pictures with her iPad out there. Maybe we're hosting an event to share about our learning with our community. Maybe we're designing or publishing or making media. All these things can be a service to our community. Maybe we're running workshops for parents or other community members to teach them. We might be just building relationships. A lot of time, that might be the start of this. It might not lead to action until later. It might be something where we're just building trust and building relationships. And rather than coming in as the problem solvers, and that's tough for students because that's what we teach them in school. We want them to solve problems. But we don't want them to come to the table as having all the answers. We want them to come to the table with their community partner as listeners. How might they more deeply understand the problem and work collaboratively to solve that problem? And I think this next visual on the next slide does a really good job of showcasing this. A lot of times we think about service, we think about doing something to someone or for someone, and it's really kind of prescriptive, where the someone is not always involved in designing or implementing or carrying out that solution. So again, my challenge to you is thinking about how can we implement a solution where we're working collaboratively with the people in our community and empowering them to lead this change through our work. So we also might think about who in our community. Sorry, I'm not checking my Instagram feed. I've got two screens going here. Who in our community might we collaborate with? Maybe it's family members or community members. Might be our global community. Here we are connecting from many different countries around the world, coming together to kind of share in this experience of the conference. It might be other educators. Maybe it's organizations in our community. Some of our high school service clubs can be great community partners for our younger learners. We might have NGOs in our community who are doing some really cool work that we could benefit from some collaboration with the students at our school. Maybe it's a local business that's near our school. We did some cool storytelling when we were in Beijing with some of the local food providers that a lot of people bought food from them and didn't really know the story. How did their business start? How long have they been in Beijing? What brings them to this area every day to work? And by sharing those stories, we can really build community. And then from there, think about, how might we be able to design an action that supports that small business? It might not even be people. It might be just physical space. I've got a group of kindergartners who've adopted a space at a park right near their school. They're learning from local experts what plants grow and what native plants grow in that area. They're able to go over and visit, and they're measuring plant growth and doing some cool math and really kind of understanding plants as well in science as they rejuvenate this section of the park. And so it's not a person, but a physical space that's their community partner. And also institutions. So lots of possibilities within our community. So we go to the next slide. What action might we take? So thinking about a unit we currently teach, thinking about something that exists in our school already, what action might we use our learning in a meaningful way to have a positive impact on a root cause of our issue? Again, that root cause part is really important because we don't want to be just addressing a symptom. This is that classic example of the beach cleanup, where we're just, having a symptom of the problem addressed. We don't really know why that trash is there, where that trash is coming from. And if we get down to the root of the issue, we might be able to design a sustainable solution so we're not back doing that beach cleanup in a couple months. Not to say it's a bad thing, but there are better ways sometimes we can address the root cause of an issue. So I've got a couple of resources to share. They've got some QR codes here, as well as some links in the slide deck. These are some of my favorites when thinking about meaningful and sustainable actions that are age appropriate for our different age groups in our school. So this is one from the United Nations called Act Now. You can scan the QR code there. It's got a link with some great ideas connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. Maybe you have a unit that's already connected to one of the goals. And this is a great springboard to think about what actions we might take to have a positive impact on that goal. If we go to the next slide, this one is also linked to the SDGs. This is called 170 Daily Actions. It's not just a clever name. There actually are 170 daily actions. So it might be students designing a media campaign to showcase one of these actions and the impact it might have right in our school community or in their homes. During the pandemic, we did some home sustainability audits where students designed actions at their home to think about how they might be more sustainable. And one more action menu that I'm going to share. And this is called the Localization Action Guide on the next slide. There we are. And this has got some different categories you can explore, and there are a whole bunch of ideas that, again, are very kind of age appropriate for students at different stages along their journey as global citizens, where they might be able to utilize what they're learning in school to think about how we might think about the energy consumption or just consumption in general. Fast fashion is a very hot topic in schools. So think about how we might be able to make some more sustainable choices. Thinking about food, the food we eat, working with our food service providers can be challenging sometimes, but also a great opportunity to think about how we might be more sustainable. Lottie mentioned in her session just previously um, about a school that worked to eliminate plastic straws. There's a student group on campus at NIST in Bangkok who I work with, and they have eliminated all single-use plastic in their cafeteria and on campus, and that was a student-led initiative. So a lot of really cool learning happening here, and just that feeling that I can make a difference, really kind of shaping that change maker mindset. We've also thought about, too, how this fits across our school. If you go to the next slide. And thinking about, where does this fit in our school? How do we find ways to include everybody? Our music teachers, our art teachers, our physical and health education teachers. A lot of times when we're thinking about some of these big initiatives, maybe we're designing IDUs, some of these teachers feel a little bit left out sometimes. So I want to take a minute. I was actually working with some specialist teachers recently, and we came up with some ideas on some ways we can think about sustainability and global citizenship through the lens of music, arts, physical and health education, and world languages. So we go to the next slide. This is it's not an exhaustive list, but this is what we came up with. So I'm just going to give you a moment just to kind of read through there. And Lottie, you're absolutely right. These are the people that sometimes get left out on a lot of our whole school initiatives. So how do we kind of make this inclusive? Make this kind of create that sense of belonging that invites everybody in to be part of that process. So I just want to give a couple of examples from some of the schools that I work with. Upcycling was a really cool student project that I think started in an art class. And students at Concordia, a school in Shanghai, they started something called Shanghai Styles. And students were able to bring in clothes that they had either outgrown or just got tired of and brought them in. And so they had this pop-up store on campus. And the students would come in and they could buy from the pop-up store, and the funds from there went to support their community partner that they were working with, who was also doing some upcycling work in the community. They eventually had a pop-up shop off campus, and it's actually the younger sister of the student who started that initiative, who's actually managing it now. And the older sister, who's now at Boston University, I believe in her third year, has a pop-up shop on campus at Boston University. In this case, anyone in the community who needs clothing, she just recognized the need in their community, can come in and take what they need. And she has a space on campus where people can drop off their lightly used and perhaps unwanted clothing. Family interviews. There's a project in grade 7 in social studies. We're talking about migration. International schools are full of people who have migrated for work. A lot of our staff members, a lot of our support staff members, a lot of our families are not in their home country in our international school community. So sharing stories about migration to kind of build, recognize the challenges, and also recognize, the perseverance and resilience of people who have relocated and been successful. Art for Impact. We had a PYP exhibition at the Western Academy at Beijing. That was their focus, was art for impact. How can we design art pieces to invite people in? And that led to a conversation about the issue they cared about and an opportunity to share a call to action. In our Global Citizenship Certificate program, we do a module talking about music for social change called Give a Social Movement a Soundtrack. And we look at how music is so interconnected with social justice and elements of a protest song, and look at some really cool examples of protests, from way back in the civil rights movement to more current examples, in music. So again, a great way to connect with students. A lot of students are listening to this music or have heard those old songs and maybe don't know the history behind it, don't know the actual meaning, and a great opportunity to kind of look there. So all sorts of really cool ways that we can engage our whole community when we're thinking about global citizenship, service learning, and sustainability. So if we go to the next slide. Here is a link to a whole bunch of our favorite resources at Inspire Citizens to help students connect with issues that they really care about. And if we had a longer time, I'd go through some of these. But there's some great ways to kind of connect our younger learners. The Flourish Project, or the Good Life Goals, has a great way to connect students who are just starting out on their journey as global citizens with some of these big issues of the SDGs. The Flourish Project has also done an IDG. If you think about the inner development goals, they've got a really great, very visual resource to look at inner development for our younger learners. We've got some resources thinking about harmony with nature, some resources thinking about social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, thinking about the well-being of our community, and all these different pieces that students are going to be connected to when we're thinking about how we might design action. We want to become more aware of this issue, think about who's already working on this, and think about how we might be able to build on that work and learn from and act with some of our community partners. So that's linked in the slides. Also, the QR code there. It's a Padlet, and it's got all sorts of things. It also has the action menus that I just shared on there as well. It's kind of a one-stop shop if you're looking for resources and some of anything you might need to be thinking about. Again, this is not a redesign. There's a lot of amazing teaching and learning that's happening in our classrooms, but really just imagine looking at that through a different lens, thinking about how we can take a global citizenship approach to the amazing teaching and learning that's already happening. So with that in mind, we're going to go to the next slide. I just want to take a moment to pause and reflect just for a few moments. So if we go to our next slide, this is what I would love for us to take away from our time together today. This isn't a do-over. This is just slight tweaks to existing units that already exist in our scope and sequence. Imagine the impact that we can have. The impact on our students. When those students go out into the community, they're talking to community members, they're talking to their friends, they're talking to their families. And this is embedded into our curriculums. This is students each year coming through our program, thinking about how we scaffold some of these skills, some of these different frameworks to support them to be successful as change makers. And as they go from grade level to grade level, they're building those skills, they're building that mindset, and they're seeing the impact that their work is having, and they're able to take on more and more as global citizens. So we go to the next slide. And our students deserve this. This is their world that they're working on. Oh, I think we missed a slide. It is the one with the leaves on it. There we go. By creating opportunities for our students to see the future is not inevitable, it's not fixed, but rather something that we shape through our actions. We develop that change maker mindset. And I think this is essential. If we're working towards the sustainable future, this aspirational future that we want to live in, we need to have this change maker mindset, this understanding that we're not just hurtling towards this dark and terrible future, but we can do something about that. We can take action. We can be change makers, and we can be empowered through some of these work we're doing in school to shape that future that we want and inspire others to join us in that work through our call to action. Next slide, please. And that's it. Our students deserve it. Our students are consuming so much media. They understand that. One back, please. We go back to the previous slide. Sorry. So I want to come back to the topic of my talk today and thinking about this idea of living our mission. Our mission statement sometimes is just a statement on the wall. It sounds pretty. It's not always very measurable. But how do we build that shared understanding in our community and really live our mission? Sorry, I'm just reading the chat here. And absolutely, I was actually just talking to Zoe about a month ago, Ellen, and that disposition that they can make a difference, I think is more important than any math or science or reading or writing or any of these other things. I'm not saying they're not important. Those skills are necessary to be a citizen of our world. But if we can teach them that their actions matter, that they can make a difference, I think that's huge. Zoe Weil's book, The Solutionary Way, highly recommend. I don't know if one of you guys can drop a link in for that. It's absolutely fabulous, and it's got some great practical tools. She's got a PDF that goes along with it on how to be a solutionary and how to do the most good with the least harm when we're designing action. So really admire her work, the Institute for Humane Education. So Ellen, thanks for dropping that in the chat. Sorry, it was a good tangent. Such a good book. All right, we go to our next slide. Speaking of stories, we want to tell stories, and we want to inspire through the stories we tell. So if you check the link on this slide, I don't have a QR, I apologize. But if you go to inspirecitizens.org and Inspire Citizens in Action, I believe is the menu. And if you click on vignettes, there are probably close to 150 stories from all different grade levels, from all different parts of the world, of students who are taking ownership of their learning and moving forward on their journey as global citizens. You can see students just in these little snapshots here, engaging with their community. Right down the very bottom, that's a particular group of students from Cartagena in Colombia, and they're working with a neighborhood in their community to do a needs assessment and design solutions. Hey, Rebecca, nice to see you. We also, if you're not feeling like reading, on our next slide, we also have a podcast, as I mentioned earlier. This might be my favorite part of my job. Get to talk to students who are really living this in different parts of the world. I've had students, seniors. I've actually had grad students on the podcast talking about their work. Recently had a young entrepreneur in her early 20s who has a company based on a project that she designed when she was 16 and is now CEO, and that's what she does for a living. So this is real work that real people do. I think that's important to kind of let students kind of see as well that this is something that people in our community are doing as a career, as a profession, working as change makers. Some of our people working at NGOs and engaged in this really cool work. My youngest students on the podcast were actually grade 1 students from the International School of Kigali in Rwanda. I had 2 first graders on the podcast, and they were talking about well-being and they were learning all about different types of well-being. They're like being physically well, being mentally well, eating good food, and doing kind of mindfulness practice. And they became experts in that and were running workshops. Remember, that was one of our things on our action menu. They were running workshops for older elementary students, for middle and high school students, and for parents. And I remember talking to them, and I said to them, I was like, were you guys a little bit nervous, working with these older students and teaching them? And they said, at first, yeah, Mr. Scott, we were a little bit nervous, but then we realized that we knew a lot more than they did, and they needed our help. And these students were so cute. They actually do a little mindfulness breathing activity right on the podcast with me. And sometimes we talk about it, and that's come up, I think, in other workshops at this conference, that age really isn't a barrier here. We've got students as young as 3 and 4 years old engaging in meaningful service projects in their community. And I 100% agree, Lottie. Sometimes our primary students are super motivated and engaged in this work because, we haven't they haven't lost their imagination yet. And they really kind of see these possibilities, and just empowering them to make a difference is so powerful as we kind of move up towards kind of these bigger projects later on in school. So we go to the next slide. Here's my challenge to all of you. Going back to your school in your role, how will you bring this to life at your school? How are we going to live our mission? So I've got a couple potential next steps for you. So we go to the next slide. At Inspire Citizens, we run some professional development workshops for teachers. And one of our courses is called The Future of the World is in Our Classrooms, where we get into futures thinking and really take a deep dive into inner development, happiness, harmony with nature, and these different ways we might be able to shape our future through our actions in our classroom. A number of GCC graduates are popping up in the chat today, so it's so great to be connected with all of you. I so admire the amazing work you guys are doing. And really, this is a great opportunity to connect with some amazing educators from different parts of the world who are passionate about global citizenship, service learning, community engagement, and designing learning that empowers students to be leaders and shape a more sustainable future. So a great opportunity to connect with community and also pick up some really cool tools and strategies along the way. If that's something you're interested in, then please reach out, Scott at inspirecitizens.org. Happy to have a chat and answer any questions you might have. Next slide. So I want to finish with gratitude. I want to say thank you to all of you for being part of this amazing conference, for the work that you all do in your own schools, in your own spaces, to inspire your students and empower them to be change makers and be global citizens. We see you, we hear you, and we're grateful for the work you're doing. And we'd love to connect further to see how we might be able to work together to just share those stories and raise awareness. There's so many good things happening in schools that no one's talking about. And that's why I think stories are so important. How can we share stories out to inspire people from other schools? Sometimes it's being part of conferences. Sometimes it's traveling. Sometimes it's just giving our students an opportunity to have a voice and have a platform. But we are exactly what is needed for impact. We are exactly what the world needs for Sustainable Development Target 4.7. Education for global citizenship and sustainability. This is what we believe, and this is what we can do. And sometimes it feels overwhelming. Schools are like big cruise ships. It's really hard to change the course, but it's important to continue to advocate for our students because our students are worth it. And by working together and having a network of people like the amazing people that I'm seeing in the chat here, who we can kind of lean into, and when things are challenging, but also to kind of share those successes and celebrate the wins and share the stories of some of the things our students are doing. So I want to say thank you to all of you for being here today and hanging out and thinking about the future and how we might design learning to shape our aspirational future. So one last slide, my contact info, I'll pop up again. Easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn these days. I don't spend a lot of time on other social media platforms. But if you do, you can follow Inspire Citizens on all those places. But if you want to connect with me directly, email is good, or find me on LinkedIn, where I tend to hang out these days. Really cool space for educate. It's sort of what Edu Twitter used to be. I think it's starting to be there. So thanks, everyone. If you have questions, we've still got a little bit of time left. And I would love to kind of answer in the chat if you want to drop those in there. Or if you just want to take a few minutes before your next session, totally okay too. Great question. Ellen just asked, do we feature any students on the podcast that aren't IC partner schools? Yes. We don't want to limit our stories to only schools we work with, because those tend to be very highly resourced schools in some cases, and then we know there's some cool learning that are happening kind of in other spots as well. We do have a number of podcasts that are outside of the schools that we directly work with to kind of support. We do a lot of work designing programs for schools and working directly with unit design and curriculum design with schools. There's a group of kids from Barcelona who come to mind. If you look at, there's an episode called Help Up, and they designed an app as part of a learning experience at their school to connect students with with NGOs for meaningful volunteer opportunities. I've got two teenagers, and it's really, really hard to. They really want to do some meaningful work, and everything says, "Oh, you have to be 18, or you've got to be 20, or you've got to be, you know." And my daughter's 13, and she could. I think she really wants to contribute in a meaningful way. So they created an app to connect students and NGOs, and it's been really cool. Do I have a tweak that comes up a lot that's easy to do? That's a really good question. I think that there are a lot of really authentic connections to sustainable development and global citizenship already in our curriculum. If you're at an IB school, there are even more. That language is already there. But if you're at any school, really, we can see those opportunities for students to take action and use their learning in a meaningful way. So I think it's really just kind of looking at your learning goals and think, how might we be able to move away from a more traditional assessment? I'll spare my rant on the 5-paragraph essay audience of one, but how might we be able to kind of showcase and celebrate and share that learning in a more meaningful way that has a positive impact? And I don't think there's a one size fits all fix for this, but really just kind of just being purposeful and thinking about, maybe it's a connection to an SDG or connection to a learning for justice standard, or connecting something we're learning about the past with an issue that's happening in the present. So I think all those things can be really kind of powerful ways to kind of allow our students to and empower them to kind of use their learning in a way that's engaging and meaningful to them, and a way that has a positive impact. What makes me passionate about global citizenship? Oh, so much. I think it really was Steve Sostak was such a good friend of mine, and still really an inspiration. Steve passed away, creeping up on 2 years now, which is so hard to believe. And he and I met in 2014. I was teaching math and he was teaching humanities. I had gone back into the classroom after getting a little frustrated as a school administrator, and just trying to find ways to kind of bring this kind of learning to life. It was something that I recognized was something meaningful. And he was one of those people. I see a lot of hearts, and we all miss him. But he's one of those people you only had to know for 5 minutes to connect with and feel like you knew your whole life. And it was really just conversations with him that helped me realize that, this is something we can do. This is a shift that we can make. And maybe it's just in our own classroom, and maybe for now. And then maybe it's in more classrooms, and then maybe it's in other schools. And that's really kind of how Inspire Citizens got started. I wasn't part of the team right away. I am a quadriplegic. You can't tell on the screen. So traveling, which was a big part of, well, it's still a big part of what Inspire Citizens does. We do visit a lot of schools. By I do a little less of that and do a little bit more virtual work. But in 2020, there was an opportunity. You may remember we had a pandemic and a lot of things switched to virtual. And it was an opportunity for me to join and just be part of this work that I think really matters to me. I think when we think about school, and I like Will Richardson's book I mentioned, A Foot in the Future, like our schools, it's not that our education system is broken. Our education is really good at doing what it was designed to do, which is not preparing students for the world we live in anymore. And we need to make some pretty big shifts in what's important and what we value in school. And I think that we need to kind of be purposeful when we're designing learning. And global citizenship, a lot of times we think about all these different initiatives that are happening in school, PBL and DEI, and it's all really great stuff. But global citizenship ties it all together. Lottie talked about systems thinking in her workshop and how all these kind of pieces fit. And global citizenship is that thread that brings all these initiatives, makes learning engaging for students, makes it real, makes it meaningful. And I think that's what kind of gets me excited about this, because we're using our learning. We're using all these things. We're spending so much time learning things. We don't often, put them in practice to shape our future. And, we're in a tight spot as a society. And we need to develop this mindset where students can be change makers and feel empowered to do the work and kind of push the world towards where they want it to be. Because if we just sit back and wait for corporations or governments, I don't think that's where it's going to be. That's where the change is going to happen. Rob Hopkins talks about this in his work as well, that, this has got to be a grassroots thing where we, in communities, we start making a difference. We demand better. We demand more sustainable. And our students can advocate for that if we give them the opportunity. So it's something I'm really passionate about, and something that I love my job. I love what I get to do. I love that I get to do this work every day with schools around the world, working with teachers, working with school leaders, working with students to nudge education and nudge our future in a direction that I want for my own children and my own grandchildren. We think about First Nations thinking and that long thinking. Roman Krasnick's book, The Good Ancestor, is another great read, thinking about the long now. And we've lost sight of that. And, that's what we need. So I'm just reading the chat here. A small group of thoughtful, committed citizens. Absolutely. And that's what's interesting here, though, because we are spread out all over the world. We have co-conspirators, even in this chat, in different parts of the planet. And we're developing these small groups. But eventually, those groups are going to connect and get bigger and bigger. And I think that's where this impact happens. Is these little shifts in mindset that are contagious and get people excited. I absolutely agree, Alice. I still feel like I've got a picture of Steve kind of working with some teachers, kind of leaning over behind them as they're working at a table. And it often feels like that, when I'm working. I still feel like, he's definitely, his influence is still there. Oh, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. I think that's our time. Thanks for coming and stay connected.